I believe. Great. So welcome everybody who is here. Okay, so for today, we're going to go over the different types of divorce. A big question that I got this week was, what do I do if my spouse wants a divorce, but I don't?
Quite a conundrum right there. It's nobody, I think, ever gets married thinking that, hey, I'm going to get a divorce. It just kind of happens with the passage of time, or somebody cheats, or there's issues that can't be fixed. But in Massachusetts and everything, our firm is licensed both in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But specifically for this, my response is going to be for Massachusetts. So if you're listening to this and you're from a different state, there might be things that are similar to your state, but everything I'm saying is specifically for Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. So, if let's say you've been married for 20 years and your spouse comes to you and says, I want a divorce, and you say, oh no, that's not going to happen. I gave up 20 years of my life. You're not leaving me. At the end of the day, if your spouse wants to leave you, they can leave you. And unfortunately, there's not too much you can do about it except make the divorce process extremely difficult, which there are people out there who will purposely try to make the divorce more difficult than it needs to be because they're angry or they're jealous. Especially you see that if somebody has already moved on in a relationship, or they just don't feel that it's fair that their spouse, regardless of how long the marriage has been going on, is saying see ya. So we've had situations where that happens, and unless you can get involved in some good therapy and fix your relationship, which we've had cases where that does happen, so good for you if you can. But if one person is adamant that they want the divorce in Massachusetts, we have something that's called a contested divorce. And that means they can go to court, they file for the divorce, you're going to get served, and that divorce is going to move through the courts, and you will end up with a divorce whether you move forward with it or you fight it all the way. So in Massachusetts, it doesn't matter. As long as one person wants it, they're going to get it.
Okay. So now, what if you're in a situation where a divorce is now on the table, but you don't want to go to court? What do you do then?
Okay. So you don't want to go to court. I think it would depend if you're the person that wants the divorce or you're the person on the receiving end of the divorce. I think the person who wants the divorce kind of has they're going to make the first choice in how they go about presenting the divorce to the other side. So if this is something that you haven't spoken to the other side about, that's usually the best thing to do, because there's these two different processes called an uncontested divorce and a contested divorce. And I'll start with what an uncontested divorce is basically, if you think about it, like say you have, I don't know if you can see, but say you have your start line right here, and this is the courthouse. So with an uncontested divorce, all the work to do the divorce, all the agreements, all the paperwork, writing out what's called the separation agreement or the divorce agreement, all that gets done before anything gets filed in court. Mm-hmm. So your start date, everything gets done ahead of time, and then you file in court. And then you basically, it's very simple. You get a hearing with the judge. The judge goes through your separation agreement and says whether it's fair or not and approves it. And then voila, you're divorced. If you aren't able to work everything out ahead of time, so even if there's one small little issue, let's say you have worked out everything. So you have kids, you figured out the parenting schedule, you figured out the holiday plan, you figured out how you're going to divide up your house, who's going to stay there, who's going to move, whether you're going to sell. And then you have this, $10,000 account that you can't agree upon. If that's the case, you have one issue that you can't agree upon. So until that issue is resolved, you cannot file an uncontested divorce. And if that's the case, or if we go back to our couple that one person is like, I'm not getting divorced, I'm not signing anything, I'm not making this easy for you. If that's the case, here you are at court again. you have to file at court for what's called a contested divorce. And it's basically the start point. And that's saying that you need some sort of court intervention in order to move the process forward. So that's what you see in the movies. If one person decides, oh, I'm filing in court, and then the other person gets served by the constable at their home, and they're like, oh my God, I'm getting a divorce. That's kind of what you think of when you think contested. And with that process, that's when you can go to court and you can get what's called a temporary order, and you can get something put into play, whether you need child support, whether you need alimony, whether, let's say, your spouse just said, see, I'm out the door, and left you with the mortgage and all the bills, and you need help paying all that. You can go to court and get a temporary order that will make it a court order so that they have to pay while you work out the rest of the issues. So that's really the difference between uncontested and contested.
Okay. Now, with uncontested and uncontested, those all fall under litigation in regards to divorce, correct?
Well, litigation is a term, it just means that the court's involved, really. But when you start talking about a case being litigious, that's what you're talking about, is getting into court and kind of the fight that goes along with disagreements. So when I talk about a case being litigious, all divorce cases, and we've had this, so I'm going to make this very clear, you have to go to court in order to get your divorce finalized. We had a case where somebody signed the papers, figured they were divorced, got remarried, had other kids. They were never divorced. So if you do not go to court and a judge does not approve it, you are not divorced. You do not miraculously get divorced just because you sign a piece of paper. You have to go to court. So going to court in and of itself, even if it's an uncontested, doesn't mean the case is litigious. That would be, if you're fighting over child support or alimony or some sort of issues, that you have to go through the actual process because you're not able to work out an agreement.
So it kind of falls more under the contested side, when things are going back and forth between parties. Okay.
I mean, even with an uncontested divorce, that most people aren't best friends if they're getting a divorce, and the process isn't always like, peaches and roses. It can be, you can have a mediation and have people sitting down to work things out where they're getting into arguments. It doesn't necessarily mean you're best friends. It means that you're committed to resolving the issues that you have, so you don't have to utilize the court in the litigious manner.
Okay. So now going back, like you said, you mentioned mediation. So now what would be the difference between, contested divorce and a mediation?
Sorry, say that one more time.
I said, what would be the difference between an uncontested divorce and a mediation?
So a mediation is just a process. A mediation is you sit down with usually a neutral party. Well, it's always with a neutral party, but you can sit down either just the two people who are going through whatever the process is. And mediation isn't solely for divorce. Anytime there's a court hearing or a court case, you can always use mediation to help resolve it. But what it is, it's an action of sitting down with the other side, whether it's a divorce case, whether it's a custody case, no matter what it is, you sit down with the other side with a neutral mediator who helps you work out the issues. And so it's basically keeping your future in your own hands. It's being able to work with the other side to come to an agreement rather than running off and arguing in front of a judge who is going to make a decision that is then going to control your life. So mediation can be done, you can have attorneys on board. We've done it in, a lot of different ways. The parties can either just go by themselves, which is perfectly fine with the mediator, or they can bring their attorneys, which is usually fine. But usually if one attorney comes, the other person wants an attorney, and attorneys sometimes don't make things better. but another way that we've helped people going through mediation, and we do mediation ourselves, but as the attorney side of it, we've helped people where they've hired us, and it's almost become more of a coaching and an education where we make sure that they understand their rights, because we have seen people, and we've seen this both with people who enter into an agreement after the litigation has started, and people who have entered into an agreement that went through mediation, where they have no idea what rights they have or what they're giving up because they didn't know what they had to begin with. So it is important, especially when you're going through something as important as a divorce, to understand what rights you have, what the decisions that you're making. There's kind of a snowball effect a lot of times where you make one decision and that has an effect on another decision. It's really important to understand that. So we've worked with people that are going through the mediation process to kind of coach them and get them prepared so that they know what they're doing when they walk in. And then through that process, before they make any decisions where they're signing on the dotted line, they'll come to us, we review it, we go through the pros and the cons, that make sure that basically you can agree to anything you want as long as you understand what you're agreeing to. And that's the job we do as attorneys with our clients going through mediation. Now, that can happen before a divorce is even filed, or it can also happen after a divorce is filed. So even if litigation is going on, there's still the ability to bring it to either mediation to try to resolve it, or there's something called conciliation, which within conciliation, you're basically going, it's usually appointed through the court. It has to be agreed upon by both sides, but you're sitting down with an attorney who is going to give you their opinion of what they think they should do. Whereas in mediation, that neutral person isn't telling you what to do. They're working the issues through with the two parties so that they can come to something. Whereas in conciliation, it's usually somebody saying, your position is horrible. Like, you're never going to win in court there. So you might want to rethink that. That's the conciliation. And that can be done with, like I said, either through a court appointment, or you can hire a retired judge. There's a lot of different ways to do that.
Okay, great. So now, another option that our firm offers is collaborative law and, collaborative divorce law, basically. So what exactly would be the difference between mediation and that, speaking in the way of divorce?
So collaborative law, one of our attorneys, Jolie, is actually a collaborative attorney. And what it was is she had to go through classes and certification, because to do collaborative law, you have to be trained in that area. I'm not, so I can't do it. But what it is basically a pledge almost, try to break it down. It's a pledge as somebody going through it. So let's say I'm going through a divorce, which hopefully that never happens again, because I already did that. but I'm going to make a pledge that I'm not going to litigate this. No matter how tough it gets, no matter how angry I get, we're not going to court. We're going to duke it out in a room. It's also sometimes bringing in therapists or financial planners. So you hire an attorney that does collaborative law. So each person has to have their own attorney. Okay. Then those attorneys work together and can sometimes bring in other professionals to help the parties resolve. Like, let's say that one person doesn't trust the other side and they feel that the other side is hiding money, or sending it overseas, or sending it to another girlfriend, or anything like that. Let's just say they could hire a financial, almost like a forensic accountant, to come through, look through all the finances and say, no, like, I understand why you're afraid of this, but there's nothing here that would give us any evidence of that. So that's one way. Then you can also have like therapists that come in to help the parties communicate. And that's really important if they have kids, because co-parenting after divorce is what doesn't screw up your children. So it's a really good way of being able to commit to a process that is much more holistic than litigation. It also is, if anything does break down, it's saying that both parties then have to basically start all over, get brand new attorneys. So it's really it's a promise,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the difference.
You mentioned in the beginning, making that pledge that, we're not going to litigate. We're going to figure this out this way. Now, with mediation, do you kind of make that same pledge, or, if you're going through mediation and things kind of go sour, are you able to then, move it to a litigation standpoint?
Yeah. So with mediation, I mean, at any point in time, if you're not happy with how things are going, or you find that there's an issue that the two people are just butting heads, there's no way to resolve this issue, which there usually is a way, but it's whether you can get creative enough to do it. At any point, somebody can file. And mediation isn't as much as a pledge, because with collaborative law, you have the expense of the attorneys, you have the expense of the other professionals. So it's not like you just sit down with somebody for a couple hours and then you're like, okay, well, that didn't work, going somewhere else. Or we've had cases where people have actually signed things within mediation and then said, no, I don't agree with this anymore, and they run off to court. So mediation really takes both people doing it, whereas collaborative law is more of like, I might get mad at you, I might disagree with you, but it's a bigger promise to do it. That's just how I see it.
It's a bigger commitment than, just kind of hoping.
Yeah, it's like the difference between marrying somebody and just like living together. Just kidding.
So as far as, quickly before we go, but like, as far as, price wise, when you're looking at, all of these options,
Oh, you froze. Hold on.
Did I freeze?
Okay, now you're good.
Okay. What exactly, and, we don't have to go into too much detail because we can make a separate video. We can talk next week, maybe more about, the specifics when it comes to retainers or hourly fees and stuff like that. But, with the types of divorce that you've talked about, what would you say is, the price difference in all of those options, when someone's coming up to the decision of what's my best option moving forward with the divorce?
I'm going to go with expensive. No, I mean, it's not cheap. Attorneys aren't cheap. None of the legal process is cheap, and you often hear the phrase of like, you get what you pay for. If I find somebody that can do a divorce for me for $1,500, I'm probably not getting the detail that I need. Now, it might be something where there's no kids, no property, no nothing, and that you might be able to do very cheap because there's nothing to fight over. But I also had a case where there was nothing to fight over. There was no kids, there was no property, and the other side just wouldn't sign the paper. So we had to end up going to court because of that. So it's really hard to say, how much things would cost or what's cheap, what's not, because you can go through an extremely expensive mediation. More than likely, if the parties are working together, it's going to be less costly than if you're going through litigation where you're subpoenaing records and you're doing depositions. The best way to keep costs down within a divorce is to really commit to working together and coming to agreements, because it's when you don't come to agreements, that's when it gets expensive. So, and that could be with any method.
Yeah.
But generally, mediation is probably going to be your least expensive option.
To start with.
It falls apart and you have to just go litigate it.
Who knows? But, and we can go into that, like I said, more detail. One last thing. So if, someone is at the point of divorce, how do you look at all of these options? What's the best way to decide what is your, what's the best route to go when you're filing for divorce? How do you decide with, 4 or 5 options available?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one right way. There's no way that's better than another way. It is completely dependent on the person's situation. Mediation for one couple might be 100% the best way to go. Whereas for another couple, especially if you get into issues where there's been domestic violence or, there's a huge imbalance of power, anything like that, mediation might not be appropriate, because you might have somebody who doesn't know how to advocate for themselves, or, it has been the yes person their entire life through a relationship. And if you always say yes, 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 if you do that through the divorce process, you're going to lose. So it really depends on the situation. It depends on if you're telling your spouse that you're filing for divorce. We've had situations where because of risks involved, or, the fear that if the other side finds out that a divorce is coming, they're just going to deplete, all the resources and the bank accounts, and, throw the house up on the market. Unfortunately, there are situations like that it happens. So in those cases, it might be one where we need to file in court so we can get them served, so the automatic restraining order that freezes finances, takes effect right away at the same time that they find out about the divorce. So there really is no one right way. The best way is to talk to, if you're going to hire an attorney, talk to that attorney about, what are my best options. If you, in order to do mediation or collaborative law, to go the uncontested route, you have to be able to have a communication with your spouse, or, if you're going through a custody issue, the other parent. If you haven't even told them that you're looking for a divorce, obviously those might not be on the table, because it would take them being on board with that.
So I guess, call attorneys, talk to offices and see, call us. We're here. We can talk about your situation, especially me. Like, I will go over, your situation and details. We can kind of figure out what would be the best place to start. And, if you're still unsure, we can definitely set up a consultation with one of our attorneys, and they can go into more detail with you as far as, what's my best option moving forward based on my facts and based on my case.
Yep.
So, it's really about, just like you said, doing what's best for you and your situation, and obviously your safety, of course. You mentioned domestic violence.
Yeah, and you'll hear people, that I think a lot of people take a pro mediation or a pro litigation, but really there's no right way. We happen to be like very litigation firm. We do a lot of court stuff, but we also do the mediation. So it really depends on the individual person as well as the individual couple, because that person might say, I want mediation, I want to be able to work everything out. And the other person says, go screw yourself. You can't do it. So
I've had people come, I've spoken to people before, and they're like, I really want to do mediation, but she doesn't want to do it. They don't want to do it. Like, well, you can't force them. So, it's
I've heard it. Can we force them to do it? No, we can't.
one route, and then, in the middle, find out that that's not working for both parties. You can start with mediation thinking that you had, this great baseline and you guys could talk, but then when it came down to the finer details, things may not be able to, communicate as well. So you have to change your course depending on, your situation. It's all personal.
That being said, you could even utilize mediation to work out a lot of the issues, so that you can come in with a partial agreement rather than starting a case having to figure out everything. There's no right way to do it. And if both parties are on board with, okay, here's a list of the things we do agree upon, and we're willing to hold ourselves to this, you can then enter that in, once you file the actual pleadings in court and get that whole part started, you can file that and be bound to that while you then work out the issues. Because a lot of times what happens is, once you start fighting over one thing, then somebody wants to hold this and say, well, I'm not giving you this unless you agree to this. And it becomes a big bartering, which again, that makes it more expensive. So then only your lawyer wins. It costs a lot of money.
Well, good. So, we have a good baseline of, the different options. I think next week would be a good time to talk about the retainer. We can kind of go through each one, and, obviously it is dependent on your situation, but we can cover, the basics as far as, what you should kind of have in mind as you go through this process, and maybe, what you should plan to maybe be spending on each of these divorces that we've spoken about today.
And if anybody who is watching, you have specific questions that you want us to answer, rather than us just talk about, some of the questions that come up during the week or that we feel that we want to talk about, send them in to us. Again, it can be completely anonymous. You don't have to, you can say, hey, my friend wants to know, we'll take you at face value there. Like us on Facebook, so that way, when we do these, you get the little notification. We are going to be putting these on YouTube as well, so you can like the channel, so that way, if you ever find somebody, you know, that is going through an issue, you're like, hey, O'Connor Family Law did this video on this. You might want to check it out. And you can direct them to our YouTube channel.
Exactly. And, you know, you can contact us through anything, you know, phone, email, on Facebook, on YouTube. You can send us messages or, you know, comments, anything like that. We check all of them daily. So, you know, we have a really good response time, and we'll try to answer all of your questions. You know, whether you want a private conversation, we can do that. Or if you want to, you know, just hear about it through one of our lives in the future, let us know and we'll address it.
But what we won't do is answer your legal questions via our chat or just via your email. You know, we can't just answer a legal question without really knowing probably more information. So, you know, if you're looking for a specific legal question in regard to, hey, I'm going through this and what can I do here? That might be a little bit different. You know, what we're talking about are more generalized questions. If you have those specific questions, we can definitely address them, but you'd need to contact Kayla to set up an intake to be able to, you know, so she can get the background of your case.
Yeah. Anything like logistical or anything like that, we can probably address, you know, just through one of these lives or anything like that. But, you know, if it comes to, like Heather said, you know, legal advice or anything like that, we need more background. You need more context because, you know, like we've talked about this whole day, is like, it is based on your situation, and, you know, what may be the correct answer for you in your situation may not be for another person, even though, you know, it's kind of the same question, it could be dependent on those facts. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you have certain questions like that, but either way, we will answer them.
All right. So thank you for watching. And Kayla, thank you for forcing my butt on here again.
The questions, and we'll be back next Friday.
Okay. Bye, everybody.